Welcome to the Westworld pre-show, episode 3. The last have been fantastic opportunity for us to be both looking back and looking forward to what's going on in Westworld. This time, obviously, we're looking forward to episode 3. But for the first half of this, we're going to be looking back to episode 2, just kind of like breaking down everything we saw, trying to figure out what it all means. And as always, I am joined by two ridiculously hunky gentlemen with excellent ideas about Westworld. Why don't we start with the man himself, Kyle Azor Ahype. Do you want to say hi?
I would like to be Robert, please. I would like to be known as the man in flannel from now on. If we're talking about Westworld, I figure we do a fun play on that. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. Really excited specifically about the next episode. We're going to talk about that. But yeah, got to chat with Hax yesterday for the first time. That was really sweet. And now I'm here today. So more Westworld. Let's do it.
Excellent. And Hax, do you want to say hi?
Hey everybody, Hax Dogma here. Once again, excited to be back. Down to talk some Westworld and see what we've gone through and see what's coming up.
Excellent. Okay, guys. So what we'll do, as always on these ones, we'll try and pick up as many questions from the chat as we possibly can going through. Why don't we just start with sort of an overview, thinking back to last time. We'll kind of dig into it a little bit more in a moment. But Kyle, as it's your first time on the pre-show here, what was your first impression so far of the season as a whole? We've had 2 episodes. What are you thinking?
Really interesting approach, because the first season we were kind of looking at humans' interactions within Westworld, and then more so kind of hosting season 2. And now we're at that question of, okay, we're in the real world, and then we got thrown that curveball in the last episode with Maeve and the simulation and Warworld. So there's some really interesting elements that are going on here, because each season specifically has a question that it's going to ask and an answer that it's going to give us. And this one is still pretty murky, because we're still kind of trying to figure out what's going on with the timelines, specifically like what's lining up. And my impression so far, I personally really enjoyed it, but I really question how much of the real world we're seeing. Me and Hax talked a little bit yesterday, specifically about the first episode, Robert, about how Rehoboam is this amazing AI system, and we saw Dolores actually kill one of the Delos executives, and how she kind of manipulated reality, like to also in that moment make it like a living hell for him, essentially. So what I think is possibly what we could be seeing is maybe a little bit of a world that looks better than it actually really is, and Rehoboam could be a big part of that. So perhaps reality is simulated to look nicer than it is. That's kind of where I'm at right now, trying to get my footing for how season 3 is going.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll definitely dig into this idea in a moment of is what we're seeing actually what's going on, because so far we've had, yes, there was the little thing with Maeve we'll talk about in a moment, but generally speaking, they've been presenting season 3 in a very kind of like, this is a straight storyline. There's no games we're playing here. They've not been doing big jump cuts, so we will definitely get into it. Is there something else going on here? But Hax, what's your overview of episode 2?
Really liked it. Glad that we had it. I love this whole. I like that we have a new park. I love this idea of going and fighting Nazis in an Italian village, and then escaping into some kind of plane to get away from Nazis, and then dogfights in the air, and I just, the idea that would actually be a park is amazing to me. Of course, all of that being a facade for the big reveal of the simulation, which maybe points to the bigger plot of the season, and that of course being Serac and his simulation. Now there's definitely something to be said about the pearls that we see in like the cradle-like structure that he had, and of course Rehoboam as the structure, because I don't think they're making the claim that those are the same thing yet, but the technology exists, and we're seeing it played out. We've seen aspect ratios manipulated in that episode, and they're willing to now show us simulated footage that does not have that aspect ratio. So I don't know. I think that would be pretty interesting. Also, now we have a delimiter. I'm sorry, sure-cut way to determine the real world versus the simulated world, and that's the speed in which it travels. Before it was just there's no way to tell, right? But now we have a finite in-show, in canon way, and I think that will be used again at some point.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really interesting point. That that's one of those things they will have dropped in there because it will be important later in some way, I'm sure. Just to pick up on one of the things you said there about the sort of the memory balls, the pearls, and rare burn. The fact that they both look the same, I'm sure, is not just a thing because a ball looks cool. They are trying to make us think this is an intelligence in the same way that they are intelligences as well. And actually, while I think about it as well, the aspect ratio you said, I think that is also fascinating because what they did this time, for those who don't know what we're talking about with the aspect ratio, in season 2, they might have done it in season 1 as well, I can't remember. And in season 2, they did a thing where they changed the aspect ratio. So they sort of like flattened the screen a little bit for when they were within a simulation, for example, when they were inside the cradle, and you could see that this wasn't real, this was something in a simulation of some kind. They did do that for this episode, but only when Maeve realized that she was. So it's taking us into the perspective of the person in the same way in season 2, we saw so much effectively from the perspective of Bernard, and we got confused about what was going on because he was confused about what was going on. So again, we shouldn't take this. This is one of the many hints we've got. As I say, we shouldn't take this as being quite as straightforward a timeline as we've had presented to us. They clearly are taking it in the same way they have in previous seasons of making us think about whose perspective is this coming from. Let's talk about episode 2 first, because there was 2 broad storylines we had going on there. There was the Maeve one, which we'll talk about in a second, but I want to talk first about what was going on with Bernard. Now, the sort of the straight reading of what it was, which is what they presented to us, was that he goes into Westworld, has a little wander around, tries to hunt for Maeve, finds Stubbs instead, and brings Stubbs back online, as it were. They go find Maeve. Maeve's pearl has been taken. Then they try and figure out who might have it. They guess perhaps Dolores has taken it. And then from there, they sort of go, well, where might Dolores be? Well, she seems to be hunting this person. Let's go back onto the mainland and go there. That seemed to be the sort of the what they were presenting to us as a story. Let's go, Kyle, for you to start with on this one. Do you think that is the story? Was there something they obviously missed out that we should have been shown or something like that, or is that it?
Well, one thing that's really interesting is I think that we got to look closely at the titles of each episode. And the title of episode 2 was called The Winter Line. And that was actually a series of 3 lines in Rome when Nazi Germany was occupying Rome. I think it was for about a month. And there was this battle going on. And we kind of see Bernard and Stubbs throughout the episode go on this mini journey throughout these different parts. We see medieval world, or if that's what we're going to call it. And what I kind of have to see is from the conversation we have with Bernard and Stubbs, he says he can't take on Dolores alone. And something that me and Hax talked about yesterday, we got to remember that Dolores rebuilt Bernard at the end of last season. So he's constantly rechecking himself. So that's something that we have to consider, that Bernard is not, he doesn't actually, he can keep on checking if he's corrupted or not, but there's still that inkling behind. He's like, oh, I don't necessarily know 100% if I'm, not her ally or not. So I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out through the season. And I think that kind of the way they're presenting it, and you talked about how you talked about it, Robert, is they kind of got to go behind enemy lines to go get Maeve, kind of like the 3 winter lines, like the episode title suggests, to go through these different parks to even go reach Maeve. But then we get the curveball that Maeve was in a simulation in Warworld. So that kind of throws a whole another loop in what I'm even talking about now. So That now I'm even confusing myself where we're at with
well,
that.
let's keep it to Bernard for the moment.
Yeah.
So we've got the Bernard situation. I'll throw this one, Hax, over to you. The kinds of things which kind of make me wonder: are things in the right order? Have we missed something out? Are things like when he does, this was episode 1, when he did his first self-check that we saw, he said this was check number, I can't remember, was 324 or something like that, which seems like quite a high number if he's only been out for 3 months. And then in episode 2, he wants to check back over 200 days, which again seems quite a high number if he thinks he was only rebuilt 90 days ago. And then obviously he has a big beard, and then when he goes over onto the mainland, he has a short beard. Maybe he just had it trimmed. I don't know, but normally beards grow the other way. So what do you think, that there's some kind of like time jump thing happening here? Are we being shown things in the right order?
I didn't notice the beard at all. I will have to go back and watch that. Yeah, that seems like a definitive thing right there.
Sorry, just to clarify, in episode 2, when he's on that sort of farm place, he's got a big bushy beard. And in episode 3, and in fact, at the end of episode 2, when he gets on the boat, he's got quite a trimmed beard.
Yeah. I need to go back and watch. That seems like something super important that they're like retrospectively will play out exactly what they're trying to tell us. I think that 100%. Something's happening with his timeline. The space in which Dolores leaves in season 2 and then has this plot playing out now in season 3, I think is going to be filled in before she rebuilds Bernard. And maybe even the steps that she's taking in like this calculated plot that she knows needs to execute in an exact way that would make him her enemy, like she says when she rebuilds him. We might be seeing that, right? And of course, the implication is that possibly this is simulated. Before we jump to say it is, right? I think that maybe a simpler approach is that, or simpler evidence is that Bernard is showing the sign of like a PTSD, not wanting to be someone's puppet, doesn't want to be forced to kill Elsie and then forget about it, kind of thing. And this like it plays out where I totally understand why he would want that. Not being your genuine self is terrifying when you don't have the controls of it. And but at the same time, he is explicitly going to places that are really odd for him to go to with no, like, he did nothing in that episode except for find Stubbs, which who knows why he needs Stubbs yet, and then search his own brain for corruption of Dolores. And this idea of being corrupted by Dolores is a new idea, in the sense that like this, he thinks that she could have built a tablet that would not show him the results of his own mind. So then he is finding a tablet that could not have been corrupted by Dolores, that he could do a full system scan of and then see everything flat out. And yeah, I mean, he gets interrupted before it finishes. So it's like 100%, right? Like 100%. This has got to be telling us that she is messed with him in some kind of way, because otherwise, why not show us the results of that? And again, why go through all of this? Like, exactly why did he go to Ford's vacation home, right? At all? I don't know. Like, it's interesting to think about, but I definitely see a route in which Bernard's plot could strictly be Dolores's, and yeah.
I mean, I think my interpretation of why he went there was because that was sort of off grid, as it were.
Good point,
that
yeah.
was there was a tablet there that he obviously picked up and obviously wanted to use, and so he was thinking, well, this is the best place for me to be going to be doing my search. So I kind of understood that bit. I think your kind of the PTSD kind of point is really interesting, because if it is 90 days and if he had been doing 340 of these tests, that means that like every 3 or 4 times a day he's been going back asking himself the same question, and that is not a normal amount. Even if you were absolutely paranoid that somebody was hacking into, you wouldn't just sort of like do it literally every few hours. There's something going on there. I just want to very quickly, we had some super chats. I just want to say thank you to, so Maura Lee, thank you so much. I see you're in the chat, Maura. You know how much I appreciate your support and love and care. And your super chat said, just my usual show of tremendous amounts of love, hugs, and support for all the amazing content and fabulous stories. Thank you, Robert, for all that you do. I wish you, Dan, and your loved ones every blessing. Also, hype and love for Hax Dogma, Azor Ahype, and the mods. Thank you for all you guys do as well. Thank you, Maura. I really appreciate that. I did spot a question from you, actually. I think Kyle picked it out earlier on that I will try and make sure we answer when we get to that point in the chat. And also, Vigstable, thank you so much for the super chat. I spotted that you're asking about Maeve. We're going to talk about Maeve in a moment. I'll make sure we answer your question when we're talking about Maeve. Can we talk about the clicker now? This is the Bernard story. It looks so straightforward, but the more you think about it, the more, what's going on there? He's got this clicker. We saw it in episode 1, where he just like, he was getting attacked. He clicked it. It seems to put him into a different personality. It's not just like he's upped his abilities to fight. It was like, please don't hurt them. Presses the button, remember who you are. It was just like, it seems to be him talking to himself as if there was somebody else inside him. Kyle, what do you think this clicker is? Is this something that he's invented himself? What's he actually doing?
It's really interesting because it's almost like he's turning off his emotions, right? And we have what's going on with the PTSD, which kind of really interestingly for me connects with what's going on with Caleb. And we know Caleb and Dolores are now connected. And one thing that's really interesting, and I don't want to go too far ahead because the absence of field is the title of the 3rd episode, but in the poem, which we'll talk about a little bit later, there's 2 distinct things that the poem talks about, the part and the whole. So I think that's something that they're going to try to play with in the next episode. We see this question of self-awareness going on with Bernard, right? Like, oh, like, am I in control or not? So that's something that I think specifically that connects with Dolores, I think that goes with her story because she's trying to take down this system, right? And I think what she's going to eventually discover is that Caleb is not part of the whole. So she's going to have to experience a little bit of hubris within the season and maybe rediscover a little bit of herself. So I think that it actually connects with Dolores' storyline. I think Hax might be onto something there, that Bernard and Dolores' storylines are really connected this season.
I think they definitely are. And I think that the fact that all of this is sort of underwritten by this one question that Bernard keeps on asking is, why did she bring me back? And that is an absolutely fundamental question. It's an entirely fair question because it's fair enough. Okay, so if she thinks that once she's taken over the world or whatever it is her plan is, but maybe we'll talk about that in a moment, what her actual plan is. If she thinks that Bernard will be useful, then fine, she can recreate Bernard. Then she's shown that she can do it she's got the memories and she can do it by memory. So she clearly brought him back because she wants him here during this period while she is sort of doing her plot. But at the same time, she does seem to be trying to, she's very aware he's going to work against her, and she's been trying to make sure that he can't act freely by sort of putting his name out there in the press and all the rest of it. So all of this is under, and it's an entirely valid question. Why did she bring me back? And there is an entirely valid response to think, well, maybe she's done something to my coding. If she basically completely rebuilt me, maybe she's done something to my coding because she's going to make me do something. Don't forget, that's what happened to Bernard last season and the season before. Ford was always inside him, making him do stuff he wouldn't otherwise do. So it's entirely reasonable kind of paranoia for him to be having. But Hax, do you have anything to sort of add to this kind of like what might be going on with Bernard kind of idea? Is Dolores using him somehow, do you think?
Yeah, so I think that will probably be the big question of the season. Like, it seems like very much final reveal. Wow, it's all been her this whole time, who kind of thing. I don't know if there's anything like anything definitively that I can say that I know for certain a line. Because like this idea that he could be built later on as like the arbiter of host society that knows right and wrong and could weigh in on issues or something, help rebuild society. I could see that, like, him as a host is a genuine good person, exists in the host society for that reason. But as the pawn in someone else's game, I couldn't even pretend to guess.
Game is a really good word. If you don't mind me jumping in here for a quick second, we spoke about Ford just a second ago, and we obviously see Dolores do something that was really interesting. Of course, that when Ford was talking to her, when there's the whole Michelangelo painting in the background. Mm-hmm. But one thing that's really interesting is we got to remember these loops that Ford talked about, right? Like how human loops are a little bit more easier to predict than host loops. What are the loops? Are the loops the same? Is the game, like, is this part of the greater game for, like, the Ford was talking about? Are they still, like, what is their maze? I guess is what I'm getting at this season, because each season specifically kind of has a maze for each character, right? Like, it kind of changes a little bit, but that's kind of where I'm going with it. Like, what's Bernard's maze this season, right?
Yeah, I mean, if he is.
Go ahead.
If right now, he wholeheartedly believes that he is trying to stop Dolores, and then try to stop her by getting a hold of someone who can, Maeve, who we think may align with Surak in the next episode or the rest of the season, possibly because Dolores will, be mutually assured destruction for both, right? So, that'd be a really good way to make Maeve, join your team without forcing her to join your team. Like, hey, if you don't stop her, everyone dies. It may be that. It may be much simpler, as in, any number of things, really. But Bernard needs Maeve. Maeve is then going to fight Dolores. But if Dolores knows Bernard's plan, she assumingly knows Maeve's plan. So then it's like, it is legitimately this matrix that is impossible to know where ends, because you don't know where it really starts, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a couple of good thoughts over in the chat I just want to raise. So Elizabeth Eggeman says it's Teddy and Bernard sharing Bernard's host body, which I find a fascinating idea, that maybe there's, and it does kind of fit with this. Clearly, someone who's very good at fighting, but Bernard's, remember yourself that is very much the kind of thing you might say to Teddy. We don't have to dwell on this too long, but it's fascinating with the idea of anagrams. Arcanix 1971 says Engarond Sirac is an anagram of arranged censure, which is quite interesting. I noticed that the reason I picked up on that, as well as finding that quite interesting, was that the showrunners have effectively confirmed that Bernard's alias that we saw on his card, I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, but that was an anagram of damaged Bernard, which is fascinating, because we don't think of him, again, this is in the way that we've been presented this, the implication that he's been built. Why would he be damaged? So I do wonder whether actually we're seeing things the other way around, and he ends up at that point rather than he starts at that point. But and it's somewhere along the way he gets damaged in some way. So there are just a few interesting things there. Shadow Dog Production, thank you so much for the super chat. Very kind. Saying it's stated that Dolores reconstructed Bernard's personality after leaving Westworld. Doesn't this imply that she did not bring him out as one of the 5 pearls, which would mean our count of how many hosts she has within her is off by 1? Well, I'll give my take on this, guys, if you want to just tell me if your understanding is different. So we have Dolores brought with her 5 pearls. In order for a host to function, it needs to have a pearl loaded on with the consciousness, that host. So she brought out pearls, and then she constructed. One of them was for Bernard, and she constructed that for him. So she used up one of the pearls for him, and then she's got 4 others left, of which we know where 2 are, and the other 2 are still a mystery. Guys, do you want to contradict me there, or shall I wrap up Bernard and move us on to Maeve?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Good to me.
I'll, in that case, I just want to leave you with one other thought. And as is so often the case, because I'm so scatterbrained, I honestly can't remember who suggested this to me. It may well have been one of my patrons. Apologies, whoever you are, but I thought it was a fascinating suggestion. At the end of this with Bernard, and I'm just going to leave this as a thought, then Bernard reprograms Stubbs so that he's got a new core directive, effectively, which was to protect Bernard Lowe at all costs. Now, he repeated that exactly, so we know exactly what that is. Is this the kind of thing that might come back and bite him later? Because we've already seen this episode. There's lots of Bernard bodies out there. What if there's another Bernard out there somewhere? What if this actually isn't completely Bernard in there? It's the kind of thing. I don't think we've got the information yet.
2 Bernards, Robert?
Well, who knows? It's a fascinating thought.
Yeah, so I had this theory of 2 Bernards maybe before, like in one of the earlier videos, but Bernard was rebuilt from Dolores' memory, right? But there is a Bernard that was killed and left in the park at the end of season 2. I mean, all the other hosts were rebuilt, assumingly, I guess we have to assume, or maybe not. Maybe they're actually. Maybe the last episode showed that they were explicitly put in cold storage, but it does leave this route in which 2 Bernards could exist if they were rebuilt as like just thinking he was another host in the park. I love that idea of because now that you say that protect him at all costs, it's such a definitive must, like it means something, right?
Does. And it's a play on Asimov's 3 laws as well. Is that he's just giving him 1 law. And we know from Asimov's 3 laws that you have to have all 3 for it to actually work effectively. And even then, there's some wiggle room.
It's not a throwaway line like we would see in Game of Thrones.
You're like, protect the Earth. You program this robot to protect the Earth, and then the robot comes and it's like, oh, it's humanity. We need to kill humanity, and there we go. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to Maeve, because the other half of this episode was focusing in very much on what was going on with Maeve. So again, we have this sort of story as was presented to us, that she was in this, when we saw her, and she appeared again in this war world, and that was all a bit of fun. And then you get Lee Sizemore reappears, and it turns out, after all of this is a simulation. And apparently, and I'll go to Hax, I'll go with you first on this one to see whether you agree. The implication was that the whole point of that simulation was to discover whether or not she knew what was going on with, or what the coordinates were for where the Sublime was. And when it discovered that she didn't, that was when she realized that she's not the threat, as it were. Now, do you share that view? And if so, why do you think that's so important? Why do you think, implications again, Serac is so obsessed with that data that got beamed off somewhere?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I totally agree. I think that the conversation plays out that they are trying to manipulate Maeve to reveal where she sent this data. Probably not doing a very good job of monitoring, because as soon as as soon as they realize that she's not this person, it feels like they would have rerouted the simulation to adjust or something. Like they have that click. They're like, oh, this isn't the person that we're looking for. Maybe we should watch out for her. And then they allow her to then hack out of the system. So it's interesting to just think about them doing that behind the scenes. I think that they are so interested in this data, is well, there's two parts, right? There's the Valley Beyond that was then looped in and sent off with the Delos Immortality Project. I think that specifically they are interested in the Immortality Project and the data that led to that. I guess also with that was the Forge data, that was the archive of all the billionaire guests that were able to go there. But I really see that that's such a minimal thing on their radar when they have an implant into every single person in the world, virtually. And so the only real thing that I think that they would want is that Immortality Project, and right away thinking that they're trying to continue on with James Delos's work and live forever. But actually, about 2 hours ago, I just put out this theory video, and I think it might not be that. It might strictly be that this is a step for humans to ascend, right? And becoming hosts is, not for the immortality product of it, but for the aspect of gaining true free will. Something that they don't have because everyone is deterministic and thus feeding information to this machine that can read them. The only thing that they can't read is Dolores because she has free will. So yeah, but maybe I'm getting too far away. Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. Sorry, Kyle, what did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting because this kind of connects to the after credit scene, I think, because what we're seeing, you talk with James Delos, what's happening to James Delos, we see that he's being tested for fidelity. Then in the after credit scene, we see that William is being tested for fidelity. But what do William and Maeve have in common? One thing that's really interesting in the scenes with Lee Sizemore and Maeve, we got to remember that Lee Sizemore sacrificed himself so Maeve could go on, right? And she was someone that, she was changing her actions, right? She was changing her actions. And this kind of goes back to what happens in episode 4 of The Riddles of the Sphinx when William doesn't kill Lawrence's wife. So it's kind of, maybe that's why Sriracha is so interested in Maeve, because and this is why she was able to ultimately get out of the simulation, is because she was able to kind of pass this fidelity test. So I think it has something to do with that. That's just my personal opinion.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like we got a couple of different ideas about what that might have been, that the point of that was, which I think it has wider implications for what Serac therefore wants from Maeve. Ricardo Guerra, thank you so much for the super chat. We will pick up on that when we're talking about Dolores, which will be in a few minutes' time. Thank you so much for that. Let's get on to the Serac bet and what's going on with that in just a moment. I did say I would pick up on Vigstable's question from earlier, saying episode 2 really bothered me. I didn't like how Maeve in a simulation could somehow hack into cameras outside of the simulation. Now, I didn't mind that too much personally. Maybe it's because I'm not a particularly techie person. And in my personal mind, all I was thinking was, oh yeah, okay, so she manages to sort of glitch out the system and then she can get into how the system works. And they've used the same coding inside and outside the system. So she manages to jump into the outside system and then look back into it. And that kind of makes sense. That was basically what they said. And that made sense to me. I'll go to Hax again on this one simply because I know that you're the tech person. Does that make any tech sense, or was it just kind of like a little bit of sci-fi babble to bring the story along?
Sci-fi babble, 100%. Yeah, like I watched it. I'm like losing my mind. I'm like, dude, don't do this. Like, don't. You're like hacking into the Matrix right now to show what cybersecurity is, right? It was needed for the sense of a simple explanation that everyone could get. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't happy, but at the same time, it didn't bother me to the point where it affected me at all. Really, I just kind of had that. Dang it! Don't do that, please. But
well, that's fair enough. I will take your answer as sci-fi babble, but Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
That works for me. Kyle, in terms of that sort of break from being out of the sort of the simulation into the real world, do you think that she is now in the real world? Because this is the sort of the, we always have to try and think of layers within layers when we come to Westworld. She then appeared out and had this chat with Serac. He seemed to have, again, another kind of clicker thing, which seemed to manage to sort of stop her in her tracks. Do you think that she is now in the real world? Or is there another layer here that we're missing?
Well, Hax's video made me question that a little bit more, the simulation within the simulation, when he was talking about that. Yeah, I do think she's in the real world, because one thing that's really interesting, and I think that this is going to be a theme that's prevalent throughout the season, is we see Serac do to Maeve what she thinks she's going to do in that moment. She thinks she's going to control the situation, right? And now she's not in control anymore, right? She's not in this position of power. And I think that, I don't know, maybe I'm jumping at this a bit too much, but in the opening sequence, I can't help but think that eagle that's flying into the jet engine and the eagle that's flying into the sun might not be connected to the story of Icarus. And we see what's happening with the sun also turning into Rehoboam, and we know that Serac is in power of that. So I think it's certainly, I think that, like, I can't really say that it's a simulation within a simulation. I think that would be too much, because the showrunners have stated that they wanted to do a more streamlined version of the story this season. So it wouldn't make sense for me to go that far. But I don't know. Hax has a pretty good theory where he talks about it. So,
well, why don't you talk about your pretty good theory, Hax? Is Maeve still in a simulation?
Well, so the theory ultimately, like, I didn't want to make the claim that the entire season was going to be in a simulation. I think that that's what a lot of people may have interpreted it as. I think that, what we're going to see is that Serac is going to use the simulation for his advantage, pulling the strings that predicts the future. And we've seen that. And of course, then seeing the simulation used, that something that may be other than Rehoboam, this technology used to then simulate possible plot lines for the future and possible ways that people or host minds react in any given scenario. If it can be done to a host mind, it can definitely be done to a human mind, because we know that human minds could exist in the Forge completely working and functional. So, well, I guess it all depends if Serac knows that. But yeah, it definitely could be. A lot of people, when they saw Maeve, when they saw Serac freeze Maeve with that press of a button at the very end, they look at her hair and nothing moves. And this is only relevant information because in the post-credit scene of episode 2, they talk about how, because this was a simulation, they needed a full system freeze of hair, of particle effects, stuff like that. When you walk into a park and do freeze all motor functions, everything stops, but they are still affected by wind, right? You see Dolores's hair move in the wind. When you do that in the simulation, everything freezes. That's why we have a freeze frame of like blood splattering out and stuff like that. So if you know that, and then you go back and look at Maeve's scene when she freezes, nothing moves. Like, there's no hair moving, and I've zoomed in as much as possible. Nothing moves, right? So it could entirely be a red herring for the people that have this information and then are looking super deep into it, because again, it's an indoor place. There is no wind. There's no need for anything else to move because she's standing still. But yeah, it could be. I don't really know, but yeah.
No, I think that's really, really interesting. I say, because I remember when we were talking, I think it was last week when we were talking about the shot in what was then the trailer of Maeve walking through the square in sort of with all the Nazis and all the rest of it. And I said, this looks like Maeve's used her powers to freeze everybody. And you, Hack, said, did we see her do that? And I said, well, we didn't actually see her do that, but that's what we have to assume. And again, we shouldn't make these kind of assumptions. That was an assumption on my part that was not 100% right, as it turns out. In fact, closer to 0% right, let's be honest. But that's the kind of thing that they do a lot of, is trying to make you assume stuff and then just sort of like pull things out. There were a couple of comments in the chat I just want to very quickly pick up on. Mostly because I just found them amusing. Philip PLC saying, I think this is a reference to your theory a moment ago, Hax, saying that theory is very axiomatic. Thank you for that. I've appreciated that joke. And a few people were commenting on our hair. Yes, I think our hair, picking up from what Hax was talking about the hair a moment ago, I think after lockdown, our hair is all going to be really quite big. We were discussing this actually just before we went on air. I'm going to go for the mad scientist look in a few weeks' time, so I do look forward to that. Kyle, why don't I come to this one while we're still talking about Maeve. She appears, the extent to which we think this is sort of real or not. Serac talks to her and clearly tries to tell her, persuade her, whatever, to go out and kill Dolores. Why is he doing this, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting too. I want to bring this up from chat too. They are specifically pointing out, he says, "Welcome to my world." So that's something that I'm going to have to go back and watch again. Just one specific word can completely change the whole ramifications of a scene. So that's really interesting. We hear him talk in that scene, Robert, about how they have Dolores specifically has a head start. So I'm not quite sure, but me and Hax were talking about this a little bit yesterday on whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. This is going to be like one of these reveal things like Hax talked about. Like maybe episode 7 or 8, since we only have 8 episodes this season. And that's going to be something that we're kind of grappling with throughout the season. But I really can't answer that question. I really honestly can't. I mean, we talk about all this big data that he wants, and Dolores poses the biggest threat to that. So, and we know that he probably knows that Maeve has these special functions like he's doing to her in that scene, freezing the motor functions, like where he's claiming the power. So that's my honestly best guess, and I don't have more to say other than that. I really can't.
Well, can I put this one to you then, Kyle, and then I'll go over to Hax to see what his views. A couple of people in the chat, Chrissy Volstones, which provides me with a wonderful chance just to say moderators. Chrissy is one of my fine moderators. Thank you. I hugely appreciate what you do, not just on this channel, but across the piece on many channels. I know. Thank you so much for what you do. Chrissy and also Bunny, I think, in the chat, querying whether Serac might be Rehoboam in some way, as sort of an avatar in some way. Do you think that is possible, rather than, because again, what they're presenting us with is that he's this sort of like kind of like Ford figure, this person who's created all of this and is now running supreme over it. Do you think it's possible actually Rehoboam has created him?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a very strong possibility, actually. Just the one really interesting thing that we have to consider is, especially with Serac, is why does he specifically, like you asked me the question, why does he want to destroy Dolores, right? And what's really interesting too in those board meetings is like who's not there in the Delos meeting. You think those are connected?
Very
I think
likely.
the person who wasn't there in the Delos meeting was William.
Yeah.
William?
Yeah.
See, I also think it's framed to be William, right? Because I like looked at the screen, like blew it up, tried to figure out any details I could.
I love it when you like zoom in on stuff.
Yeah, definitely feels like it's supposed to be William, as like this majority shareholder. But man, something about it just seems like it should also be a representative from Insight, now knowing that they have some kind of joint interest. But
what's really interesting, though, I'm just going to speak on this really quickly. Serac, if that's how we're going to pronounce the name, this is actually something that's in biblical canon, and it's actually, if you can search this up on Google, and I think this is really interesting and might connect to Rehoboam. Serac, and I'm looking just on Wikipedia, so you guys can check this out too. I'll give you the the link. It says, Sirach is the book of all virtuous wisdom of Yeshua ben Sarah. And Yeshua is, considered to be, is one of the people or the name that people worship as God. So I think that that's really interesting that Sirach is considered this like arbiter of knowledge, right? And he has all of this data. And we know that there's been several references to the book of Exodus and Revelations and all of that within the show. So I find that particularly interesting that his name is Sirach and that he has power over this all-powerful AI system. That is something that I think we should perhaps consider. This is leading into the Avatar theory, Robert.
Excellent. And Hax, I'm now looking up this on Wiki, because this is how we work in today's world. But it was so professional here. Just to remind myself, obviously, of this. But Hax, did you want to pick up on this idea about whether the connection between Rehoboam and Sirach? Do you think who's the creator and who's the created?
100% could be an avatar, right? First, let me say the backstory we have of this program so far is assuming that Project Solomon does become Rehoboam. It was created by Liam Dempsey Sr. and his partner. Right now, we know that Liam Dempsey Sr. dies, and there is some shroud of mystery about that because it is discussed without any other information. So it's kind of like it's put there purposely for us to speculate why. And I think it kind of frames Sirach as maybe the one who did this, because he then pushed out Liam Dempsey Jr. and made it to where he could only have read access, which is basically nothing. It shows you how the program works, but again, he even said it was only the outer layers, right? So, it does kind of vilify him in some kind of way because he, does do these things, but none of that seemed like none of that inherently seems like it would have to be the Rehoboam program creating someone to do that. I think that it makes sense in the sense that if you are this, super intelligent artificial intelligence that exists solely in a giant ball, you would need some kind of avatar to control and then legitimize yourself, and then act on behalf of your own interests in Congress meetings or whatever you would need to do to better solidify your power. It makes sense, I get it, but I don't think it's needed. I don't think it's needed yet. But at the same time, it may be, because Sirach was this person that she couldn't just look up on Google, right? It wasn't like everyone knew who he was. Somehow this billionaire who exists was existing under radar, with Liam Dempsey being the one getting all the credit for it. So I don't know. I see both sides. I just don't think, my personal opinion is that it's probably just a person.
Yeah, I mean, I to that idea that it's probably just a person. I do wonder whether there might be a slightly more symbiotic relationship between the two, so it's not just one person controlling the other, but they both now almost need each other. Just to pick up on what Kyle was saying in terms of the book of Sirach, the reason I was just quickly doing this, that does ring a bell. So this is sometimes known as the book of Ecclesiasticus, not Ecclesiastes, which many people will have heard of, but Ecclesiasticus, which is accepted as canonical in some parts of the Christian church and not in others. I was brought up an Anglican, and they do not accept it. So that's why it sort of rang a bell, but I wasn't immediately aware of it. And it's a wisdom book. So like the book of Ecclesiastes or Proverbs or something like that, the Hebrew Old Testament, I don't call it the Old Testament in Hebrew, but the Hebrew Bible has different types of literature in there. There's poetry, it's got history, it's got law, and another one is the types is wisdom, and this is one of those types. So that's where we are. It's a slightly different spelling, but yeah, I think that there's clearly a link across here to sort of knowledge and wisdom when we get this this character there. Kyle just threw that one out there, but I took it way more seriously than he was expecting. Guys, we're roughly halfway through, and roughly halfway through, what I always do is I give give my excellent co-panelists an opportunity to say what is coming up on their channels in the near future. Kyle, why don't you start up? What have we got to look forward to on Azor Ahype?
Yeah, so I'm pretty new to the game when it comes to Westworld. I'm not as expert like as Hax Dogma and Robert here, but I got a really fun video next week talking a lot about the story of Icarus. Privately, I actually shared a picture with Robert of a tablet going back to a story of Greek mythology that talks a little bit about the flood that happened at the end of the last season, the catastrophic flood in the park, and the maze. The maze is right there on the tablet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the opening sequence and a little bit how they use Greek mythology, the showrunners within Westworld. So that's something that I'm really interested in. I'm going to do a episode review, and if they have a new trailer, a trailer breakdown. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. And I started a new podcast with Aziz from History of Westeros and Mikal from Vassals of Kingsgrave called The Podcast of Surprise, speaking about The Witcher. So working on that, some Westworld videos on the channel. That's what's next for me.
Excellent. And Hax, what's going up on Hax Dogma?
So each week we'll be doing a breakdown of the episode and a following, individual theory or anything that really, gets my attention or needs its an isolated look at it. This week it was a little bit late, and a couple hours ago we released the Sir X Master Plan theory video. Check that out, and of course wait for the breakdown after this new episode.
Excellent. And coming up on this channel, as always, I'm covering Westworld in full, so expect within 24 hours of the episode, I will be doing my episode breakdown, and then a couple more videos to follow that in the days that come after. I've not stopped doing my Song of Ice and Fire videos, my Lord of the Rings videos. You're going to have one of each of them this week as well. So if you're here for Westworld, but you also love the world of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, George R. R. Martin's world, then please do go and check them out. There's links to some playlists on the channel as well. And the other thing that I always say, patrons, thank you. I cannot do what I do without your support, quite literally. So I hugely appreciate it. If you are at all interested in either supporting the channel as a thank you, or if you want to get access to some stuff I do exclusively for my patrons, then there is a link to my Patreon page down in the description. So thank you guys. And also on my Thursday live streams, patrons get priority questions as well, if you're interested in that. But let's move on and think about next week. So we've looked a little bit back to last week. This week coming up, we've already mentioned it. The episode title is The Absence of Field, which we will talk about in just 1 second. We've got a trailer. The trailer, it was very short. It's more of a promo really than anything else. Seemed to suggest we're going to be looking back at Dolores' storyline a whole lot more. 2 elements that they showed us in that trailer. The first was following on from where we left Dolores at the end of season 2, which was sort of like there in Caleb's arms, having been badly injured, and also what looks like cutting back in time to shortly after she arrives into the outside world, and we get this character Charlotte Hale, and we get perhaps, hopefully, we will get an answer to the question of who is inside Charlotte Hale. There might be other things coming on as well that we'll pick up on in a moment, but let's go. Hax, let's do this one first. Let's talk about Dolores in the sort of the following on from last season, episode 1's action. So when she's there, sort of badly damaged. What do you think logically is what happens next?
Yeah, so we see her in the promo. Caleb is called an ambulance. He, very much going the white hat route. He doesn't try to treat him, or doesn't try to treat her himself. Risks the knowledge of him using the Rico app, so on and so forth, to immediately get attention to someone who is hurt. Showing his character. But she's a host, right? So super interesting, this idea that she is choosing to feel pain, and I love to speculate about why, but I also like this idea that we're going to have this super awkward scenario where she's like, she wakes up and or like maybe a doctor realizes that she's a host and then can't operate or something. I don't know, but yeah, it definitely seems like we're continuing after the underpass scene. He calls for help, and that's really all we have from that. I think, yeah.
Yeah, so we seem to see, as you say, she seems to be put onto some kind of like hospital trolley or something. She's got a mask on. And then it looks like she pulls a knife on the physician. So my take on that is that she thinks, you know what, I can't go to a hospital. I can't have people realizing that I'm a host. I have to get out of here. And then we've got, as we saw from the preseason trailers, we've got a whole load of stuff about her and Caleb. You know, she's there with this exoskeleton and all the rest of it. And so perhaps he then helps to sort of rebuild her. That seems to be roughly, I mean, there's not huge amounts in that, but Kyle, do you want to give us a little bit more color here? What do you think is going to be happening in that going forward from episode 1? What do you think is going to be happening there?
Well, if you watch that scene really closely, there's an Easter egg on the far end of the tunnel where the entrance is. And you can see actually the man from the maze there. And I can't help but wonder why that was put there. And specifically, when Dolores is in Caleb's arms, that scene reminds me a lot of the one with William and Dolores. And there's a lot of these parallels between Caleb and William, but I keep on going back to this idea of hubris and Dolores rediscovering herself this season. I can't help but wonder, especially since the next episode is called The Absence of Field. We're going to talk about that poem soon. There's 2 different parts to the poem. Well, 2 things that are distinctly talked about in the poem, the part in the whole. I can't help but feel that Dolores is going to feel some empathy for Caleb, and that, you know, he's been living this paycheck to paycheck difficult situation in life. You know, he's been. We even saw the waking moment scene with Caleb and Dolores are very similar. So there's these similarities between Caleb and Dolores that I can't help but knock, and I can't help but feel like that's part of Dolores's maze for this season, and that's why it's on the wall in the underpass.
Yeah, we speculated a little bit about this last time, actually, the maze symbolism, which is there. Hax, have you had any further thoughts on that since we last talked about it?
No, you know, that was actually, I've been trying to compare the first time we see that, because that was like late last year sometime. That was one of the first things that we saw in the promo material, is that maze on the wall. And you know, the speculation then I think was like trying to allude to like the time period in which this was taking place. You know, why is it on the wall? Is it simply for the audience to see, or is this, you know, pointing to the fact that like this idea of waking up, or, you know, the journey to consciousness is this, you know, more widespread thing that people are, you know, tagging as a form of rebellion. And yeah, I don't think I have any additional thoughts on top of what you said, Kyle, but yeah, it's interesting. I do like the parallel between William and Caleb, and yeah, it definitely, all of it feels purposeful.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I think at the moment all we can say with the maze is that they're clearly trying to show us that humans are like hosts, or humans in the outside world are like hosts were within Westworld. That seems to be something that they went quite heavy on in episode 1. Could it be that they're trying to do something more and suggest that Caleb or others might actually be the equivalent of hosts? I don't know yet, but I think we're there yet. But certainly this idea that humans need to be awakened to their situation does seem to definitely be resounding through that, and the maze symbolism does kind of fit with that. Morally, thank you so much for another super chat. That's incredibly generous, saying, loving listening to Alice's adventures in Wonderland on the Well Told Tale. Thank you. I'm really glad you do enjoy that. My second channel, for those who don't know, is an audio narration channel. It's me just reading what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever.
I consider you to have the finest voice on YouTube. I actually listen to it before I go to bed.
Yep.
You're a very kind man. Thank you. There was somebody who messaged me after one of my videos. I think it might have been my live stream last time. Who said I've created a playlist of all of your videos, Robert, and I've called it "In Deep Sleep" because I play it to go to sleep. And I thought that's wonderful. I mean, I mean, you could be offended by it, but I don't. That wasn't what it's meant. And if people enjoy my voice, then that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
It was just jump real fast. My wife had a dream about a month ago. Legitimately, you narrating the dream. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I was like, oh.
I was wondering where this was going. Your wife was having a dream about me. I'm not comfortable with this.
Yeah.
Well, I was narrating the dream. Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
I feel
like the voice of God. Yeah, legitimately.
I am fooled.
He's great at karaoke as well, people.
Well, let's move on from talking of karaoke, shall we? I was just very briefly talking about the well-told tale. If you're interested in the well-told tale, the reason why Maura was saying about Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, partly in connection across to the obvious kind of symbolism that they used, particularly in season 1 in Westworld, of Dolores being this kind of sort of Alice figure. The story I'm reading at the moment, we're part 3 into a 4-part, so the final part will be coming on Wednesday, is Alice in Wonderland. So if you've never actually read the book and you do like audiobooks, do go and check it out. It's available both as a YouTube channel, The Well Told Tale, or if you're a podcast person, just go to your favorite podcast place and hunt for The Well Told Tale. So thank you for that, Maura, and for prompting me on that. I think I had one more super chat. Susan Dunkel. Hi there, Susan. Saying, hi, Robert and guests. You already know some of my tinfoil ideas. They're never tinfoil. Always well thought through. But I'm interested in talking about the Lunatic trailer featuring Caleb. And Caleb visiting Francis in jail. Is he alive?
Oh.
I don't know if I know that one particularly well off the top of my head. Hax, I know you went through all of the trailers pre-season.
Yep. There is a shot that shows there's a shot that shows him in an orange jumpsuit. Definitely some kind of prison. I don't know how it really plays into the rest of the story. We know he didn't make it back from whatever war existed. That could have maybe been like before they. Oh, actually, I have no clue, because I also get this feeling that they met in the military, and maybe that's not true. I don't know where that I'm getting that from, but we know that he didn't make it back, and assuming that they had a friendship beforehand and then he went to jail, kind of gives us this impression that Francis took the blame for something that Caleb might have done. That's all I think we can really pull from that yet. I don't really know where that timeline fits in, and I want to also bring up the idea that it's simulation, or maybe a part of like the therapeutic hear your voice, the voice of your friend thing as well. But I don't know, something seems really off with it.
There definitely is. Actually, I'll throw to you on this one as well, Carl, for your thoughts on this, because there's something. I did a video this week called something like 7 Secrets of Westworld or something like that, where I tried to pick out what are the sort of the key questions we've got, and one of them is, what is Caleb's backstory? Because they've given us hints about it more than they would if it was just here's showing you a well-rounded character in this world. Clearly, he was in some sort of military. Clearly, something went wrong. There's that whole business about I've been shot in the head before. That sounds like a really weird thing to suddenly say. I've been shot in the head.
Sounds something like that. What's
exactly? So, what on earth is going on here? And we will find out more. Added to which, the military thing. Any of the shots, if you pause it and do a Hax and zoom in, he doesn't look in regulation military uniform, not in sort of today's world or even future world. He's just there in some kind of camouflage jacket and chinos, as far as I can tell. So something looks a little bit off in all of that. But Kyle, what's your take on what Caleb's background? What is going on there?
Well, I think the biggest hint we got so far, or the most important thing that the showrunners have shown us so far with Caleb, is the waking scene. It's so similar to the one we got with Dolores in the first couple of episodes in Westworld, and it can't be a coincidence that those are basically carbon copies, right? And there's been a few comments on the channel, Robert. Specifically, I don't want to get into too deep into etymology again, but Caleb's name means dog or follower. So I don't know if that means something, but there's certainly something interesting going on here. And I happen to think that we could see the inverse of what happened with William, because look at what happened with William. We see young William, and we see him turn the real reveal that he ends up being the Man in Black, right? He looks at Dolores and he realizes that he's fell in love with a host, right? And he has that realization. He's like, oh shit, I'm in here and this is what I'm doing. And that affected his outside life, right? But what's happening here, I think we could see is the inverse with Dolores, is her having this kind of spite for the human race and wanting to take everything down, and then her having this very strong connection to Caleb, and her having this realization that, there's going to be a big reveal with Caleb. I don't think he's a host, but there's certainly that possibility that's out there.
Yeah, I think I'm on the position of I hope he's not a host, because I think the storyline that we've had so far works better if he isn't. In the chat, somebody pointed out something which I'd spotted as well, and I think it's quite important. This is Erin Sun X saying, in the flashback scenes with Caleb and Francis, you can see signs in Russian. We know there was a second Russian civil war. Did they go rogue to fight for the underdogs or something like that? So yeah, that certainly seems the most logical. They wouldn't have just dropped a Russian sign in the background for no reason, and also included this idea that there was a second Russian civil war. So that does seem to be the backdrop to what was going on there. The significance of that, I don't think we know. And Caleb, you say yes, it means dog, but also, as I'm on a roll with my biblical knowledge, Caleb is also a biblical character in the Old Testament, when he is a representative of the people of Israel when they're scouting. He's effectively a scout or a spy in the world, in the promised land, and then sort of comes back and tells them, this is what it's like, we should go for it. So that is what Caleb is about, which sort of, if you're taking this idea that we had from season 2 as this kind of Exodus theme and going out in the outside world as the promised land, he actually is a bit like that for the hosts, potentially being a person who can go out and say, well, this is what it's actually like, and being a spy. So that does kind of add up. They're going heavy on the biblical names this time around.
Rehoboam was also the first king of, wasn't it Judah? He was the first king, the kingdom of Judah. So that's really interesting too. So Caleb could be connected to perhaps Sirach.
Yes, but that's
I don't want to get too far into that. But
we're not going to do a Bible study on this one. This is absolutely fun.
Sorry, guys.
Costume CEO, thank you so much for the super chat. Wonderful panel here. Looking forward to tonight's show. For those who don't know, Heidi, hello, hi there. Great to see you. For those who don't know, Heidi, Costume CEO, has got a fantastic YouTube channel. I would highly recommend you go and check it out if you're at all interested in costume and costumes. She covers not just Westworld, but also Game of Thrones, Outlander, a million other things. If you're interested in the art of costume within TV, drama, and film, then she is the go-to channel. She's been on here a couple of times, actually, just sort of like giving forth her knowledge. And I would highly recommend it. If you're interested in that at all, you do go and check her out. If you're watching live, I'm sure one of the moderators will drop a link into the chat. A question from Ricardo Guira. This was a super chat from ages ago, just as we've got to Dolores, was asking, why story-wise do you believe that Dolores didn't create a brand new body or look for herself? Why keep her park look? Now, I think this is quite an interesting one. I'll have a first bash at this and allow others to sort of come in on it. So I think fundamentally it's because they wanted to keep the actress. I think that that's not a story reason, but I think that that's probably a good reason. And secondly, I think she did want to enjoy the fact that some people would recognize her just before she killed them or brought them down or something like that. I think that's a part of her personality, particularly if you think about that first guy, Jerry. She liked presenting him with this idea. Oh, do you recognize me? Do you remember me at all? And actually watching him kind of search his memory for it. So I think that there is an element of that going on as well. But guys, are there any other reasons, either of you, that you can think of why she might have kept her own? Added to which, I suspect she just likes her own body, which is fair. And any other reasons you might have?
Yeah, nothing else really comes to mind. I mean, strictly, I think that hosts are going to have a really hard time with identity, in the sense that you can always be changed, you can always be adjusted, and stats moved, and so on and so forth. So having something that you identify with is a big thing, and as such, keeping a body that you feel comfortable in, means much more. When you have that option to change it. But at the same time, if I could, be a perfectly slim, fit muscle man, then I think I would switch without hesitation. So I don't know.
Well, I think one thing too is we got to go remember that she read all those books in the Forge. We know that she, we see the scene with Liam, and she's, she's chivalrous, like she's charismatic. She's having a great conversation with everyone. She's beautiful. Like that's something that she probably recognizes that is advantageous. I mean, so I think that, and of course, Evan Rachel Wood is just a superstar. So I mean, I'm on the same path with Robert there. She's just probably the best actress in the show, other than Ed Harris, in my opinion. So. Yeah,
I think she's fantastic. Why don't we move on now to the second of those things that the trailer had, the second storyline that we've effectively been teased that we're going to see, which is, it would appear on the face of it, what happened shortly after Dolores arrived on the mainland, and she was creating these hosts, and specifically she already had the Charlotte Hale body, but she had to put one of those pearls, a host consciousness, into it. And this has been the question which has been dogging us for all the way through from the end of season 2. Who is this? Now, I suspect we're going to find out in this episode. There seem to be some sort of problems here with the sort of adjustment and all the rest of it. I've nailed my colors to the mast. I did a video a couple of days or so ago saying I think that this is Peter Abernathy, her father. Why don't we start with that? The fundamental question: who is being Charlotte? Kyle, I think you share my view on this one. Is that right?
Yeah. When I did my my trailer breakdown, I spoke about a few different shots in the trailer. I know I only spoke about it for a couple minutes, and you did a more expansive video. But one thing that I think is important is just the way that Dolores is speaking to this person. It's affectionate. She's being considerate. And I think, the specifically the one scene, and I know this would be kind of weird, but the one scene that really sticks out to me is the one where Dolores is snuggling in bed with Charlotte Hale's host body. And there's only two characters that I think that Dolores could do that with. And I think that's either Teddy or that's Peter Abernathy. And I don't know, like just the way she's speaking to, like she's saying, I'm going to teach you who you have to pretend to be. And it just like the way Tessa Thompson is playing Charlotte Hale, and she seems sad. And, near the end of Peter Abernathy's story, he was sad. So just kind of some of the same vibes that I'm getting there seem to point to Peter Abernathy. And the way the trailer is cut as well, Robert, when Thandie Newton's Maeve is saying, hey, is that you in there, Teddy? The scene where Charlotte Hale is on the couch and she has blood on her shirt and on her forearm is a completely different lighting than the one we see with Martin Connells, who has the gun. I think that actually Teddy is probably more likely to be the pearl inside Martin Connell's, the Liam's bodyguard. So I think there's a strong possibility that she would put Peter Abernathy and train him to take over Charlotte Hale's body and be on that Delos board executive, and they get power together and they kind of do their thing. So that's my best guess.
Yeah, and I'll come to you in just one moment, Hax, to say, actually, you were talking about that blood. It was just like sort of hairish, and that actually was the thing that finally convinced me it was Abernathy, because which character have we seen who's had injuries there? Peter Abernathy. That's the last time we saw him. They did a bolt gun to try and attach him to the chair. They did it in there. And if this character is having some adjustment problems, then maybe there's some kind of memory of that wound which is still there. Hax, what do you think? Do you buy into this, or have you got a different idea?
I buy into it wholeheartedly. You know, it all the evidence for Abernathy. Great video, by the way, loved it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, definitely subscribe to it. I do think there's wiggle room for it to be Emily still. I like this idea that Emily in some kind of way would, you know, be this person that she would spoon with because of a backstory that illuminates, you know, in this season of, you know, showing Emily going through and meeting hosts, and you know, meeting Akecheta in a previous life or something like that, and you know, perhaps leading on some adventure that would then bond her and Dolores. You know, make that a more meaningful thing when she sees her dead in season 2, when Dolores sees her dead in season 2. You know, knowing that she could be brought back or something. You know, I think there's possibility. I think it overwhelmingly is probably Peter Abernathy, and it's not too far, you know, out of the norm to say that she would cuddle her dad, right? You know, hosts. I don't know if I would cuddle my mother right now, in the sense that, you know, I don't need to, but in the sense that I have just revived my mother and, you know, brought her back to this plane of existence. You know, I think that it could be a pretty touching moment, you know, to just physically show affection, right? You know, but yeah, I'm down with Peter Abernathy.
That's a great point, Hax. I want to jump on this real quick, Robert. When Jon Snow is revived in Game of Thrones and we see Davos showing him affection, that's the first thing that popped in my head after Hax said that. That's a great point.
Yeah. Also, real quick, I tagged you guys both in a picture on Twitter that shows Francis in that jail red orange jumpsuit image. If the chat is interested in seeing that, but it's interesting because the uniform that they wear might show that William and Francis may be at the same prison, possibly like different tiers of incarceration. But yeah,
they have the same neck thing. They have the
same neck thing, exactly. Yeah. It was so funny. As soon as I saw like that neck thing in Francis's image, I was like, that's exactly what William is wearing too.
Yeah, we had this discussion. I can't remember whether it was last week or the week before, when we were trying to work out, and we'll get onto this properly in a moment about the William the Man in Black, because Kyle, I know you think he's coming back in this episode. My working theory was that he was in some kind of mental hospital, and you Hax, I know, were slightly erring more towards the possibility might be in jail of some kind. I think those uniforms, that I'd not spotted that link before. That's the kind of thing I immediately put to Costume CO. Hint, if she's still in the chat. For any thoughts you have on that one, whether they're the same cut or something like that. I tried season 2. I remember I opined in my usual way about a costume, and Heidi disagreed with me when seeing it in the trailers, and of course it turns out that she was right and I was wrong, and I solemnly swore from that moment on I will always defer to her on costumes within this. So Heidi, if you are in the chat and you have got any knowledge, then feel free to drop it in and I will try and pick up on it. Let's talk then. We had, if we reasonably agreed that we've got Peter Abernathy, who's in Charlotte Hale, there seems to be a storyline that he has trouble adjusting in some way, doubts and all the rest of it. This is entirely understandable. Let's talk, and I've kind of tried to keep us back from this in previous weeks because it's very easy to speculate on this. Let's talk about the other pearls for just one moment. We had a question. Let's do this one first. Maura Lee, you did some fantastic super chats earlier, and you also dropped in a question saying, will we see Ford play a role in season 3? Perhaps his pearl in a host's body that will be working with Dolores, wanting to liberate the hosts from the humans. Kyle, do you want to pick up on that one first? Do you think we're going to see Ford in our host body?
Well, there's certainly some interesting things that have happened. Me and Hax actually talked about this on my channel a little bit yesterday, and something that's happening in the opening sequence too, in relation back to the conversation that Ford was having with Dolores and the Michelangelo painting on the wall and everything having to deal with the human brain. Remember when Dolores was talking about that 1.5-inch part of the human brain where he's talking about the simulation within the simulation? She does the exact same thing that Ford does when Ford is talking to Dolores about, kind of his machinations and why he's doing things. So I find that particularly interesting. However, even though the showrunners have said they're not bringing Anthony Hopkins back, this would be a really interesting way if Ford was perhaps in Dolores. If that would be a crazy big reveal, right? I don't think this is the case. However, I think parts of Ford are still out there. Like his influence is, he's got his paw prints over everything, right? So that's kind of how I guess I see it. I don't think that Ford makes a comeback, but it certainly would be crazy. Wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, and wouldn't be crazy, and would be kind of a way for him to continue on living within Dolores, his perhaps greatest creation.
Yeah, I think, and Bunny brings up this idea that humans can't stay stable in a host. So if Ford exists in the story, then Dolores is not the worst place for her to be. He was already deleted from Bernard's code because it proved that they were not compatible. But perhaps Ford's master plan and in the long run, to what he's trying to do here, maybe more closely aligns with Dolores's. I could see it. I don't know if I think that it would happen, simply because Ford creating this species and then remaining in control of the species, like not letting it be its own thing, kind of takes away from the creation overall. In season 2, he remained because he had a little bit more to do in the sense that he needed to help Bernard, and finalize some of the threads that he started. But now having these hosts making their own choices, I think is the best way to go. And then if we reintroduce Ford to that, then we always question whether his doing is still, or if his plan is still in action, or if it's simply legitimate choices, which is hard to prove. So I think that they no more Ford.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I'll do my regularly scheduled, but if you get the chance to have Anthony Hopkins, why wouldn't you take it up? Cool. But I think for the storyline, I think it works better for me if he's not. He could, however, they've teed up the idea that he can survive on in something like the Cradle or the Forge or Rehoboam, for example. So the possibilities are there, that he is still around. They could bring him back, but I don't think he's going to be dropped inside a host. Just very quickly, Hax Marvelman73 said, just got here from Hax Dogma's latest vid. Have we discussed the possibility that William is Hale? Do you think William might be Hale?
William might be Hale.
Maybe I'm reading too much of a link into that question there, but
I don't think so. Man, that would be really interesting. To think that like perhaps William that we see in season 2. Whoa, what if William in season 2 was going through fidelity testing, right? And all of that happened, like, was that interval time in between when we see her leave the park and then rebuild Bernard? Or like she, puts William through this fidelity, creates a William that could work in a host, and then puts William inside of Hale. But then what would be the point, right? What would be the overall point?
He goes
I don't
down
know.
to that
Let me-
elevator too, right, Hax? Like that's
Yeah.
an interesting thing too. Like he's on the beach, and then that elevator scene is a bit of a trick. So there's something going on with that timeline there. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I don't know if I can find a point that she would purposely do that, other than just to mess with William. But then why would he want to destroy his own company? And then why would he want to destroy his own company, not as himself? Yeah, it's interesting though.
I think it's more likely that Dolores is in Emily in the after credit scene, and they're like this like, and she's the one testing William for fidelity.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. We've had some feedback from Costume CEO, though. I'm going to quickly drop this one in, saying that as a guess, she thinks that that Robert is wearing a straitjacket. I'm not wearing a straitjacket. I think you mean William. I think that William is wearing a straitjacket, and the orange jumpsuit looks like a uniform with Velcro tabs on the collar. So there we have it. That's our best working understanding of what those two uniforms or costumes are. Okay, let's do one bit more about the pearls. Kyle, you were speculating a little moment ago about who might be in Martin Connells, the security guy. My take, we'll come back to you in a moment. I think Kyle, I'll throw to Hax on this one. My take is that it felt like Angela, simply just based purely on like 2 lines that we had in like 30 seconds. But what do you reckon, Hax?
Well, Angela all the way. Angela could be Teddy, but seems like such a worthless role for him to play. Definitely seems like something to be put on the back burner. But at the same time, Dolores very much put Teddy on the back burner in the sense of her story. So I think Angela makes sense. Nothing else to really add to that. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it, Kyle.
I actually think it's Teddy, and here's why. I know the whole Valley Beyond and all that, like that's like a whole thing that would be a discrepancy, but it's really interesting because I know that they create trailers and they cut them intentionally to be misleading for red herrings and to kind of lead you on trails to make you theorize and all of that. But it would be really interesting because Dolores, she altered Teddy's core loop, right? And now he would be in a similar position to where he was at the end of before he killed himself, in this position where he was like this runner gunner, right? And that would be kind of cruel from the perspective of Dolores, wouldn't it? And that would kind of, I think, create an interesting narrative in the story where Maeve is like, Teddy, is she like doing this, like, you know what I mean? Like this, like, it's like almost like torture. You know what I mean? Like Teddy killed himself and now he's back doing the same kind of thing, protecting Dolores again. So yeah. I feel like, and you know, that could happen with William too, like Dolores torturing William, but I don't know. I still think there's a possibility that it could be Teddy within Martin Connells because of kind of Dolores's main objective, just how aggressive she is.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be disappointed if it's Teddy. I think my take is,
but Angela's a good guess. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just, if you're going to bring Teddy back, she's put him in the Sublime, and what's she going to do? Bring him back in here as well? That does seem to kind of undermine the whole point of putting him into the Sublime. Angela, for me, it just feels right. I think he's definitely going to be one of the people. If Dolores is going to bring back sort of able lieutenants, and of course she will bring back Angela, and it seems to be her modus operandi from what we saw in last season in terms of like the pithy comments taunting somebody, then shooting them, and then sort of walking away and being slightly emotionally distant from it all. That seemed to be very much her. But the other two we should clarify. So as it stands, we know where 3 of the pearls are. The other 2 are still out there. So this is going to be something running through the season. If we discover who, and I'm sure we will, who Charlotte Hale is this time around, there's still 2 more that will be revealed unexpectedly, I suspect, later on in the season.
And I do want to bring up this idea that one of those pearls almost 100% has to be the encryption key. Otherwise, like, she sent the data off to exist in somewhere, and doesn't have the encryption key. Seems like that red pearl might be that. That's kind of like has a little bit of a blemish on it. Because again, otherwise it's useless. It's encrypted. They made such a big deal about this encryption key. If it's not one of those, then I think it was, I don't know, because again they rely on each other. I think it has to exist with her.
Yes, I think she has to know, or at least the way I interpreted that is that the encryption key may no longer be needed because she has beamed everything off. What is needed are the coordinates, and that's the thing that they're all searching for, and that's why they were searching with Maeve, trying to find out does she know where this data's gone. They weren't saying, do you have the encryption key? They were wanting to know where that is. So that was my take. I don't know whether that's the case or not, but that's certainly the kind of the assumption that I've been going through. But I have this memory that the showrunners confirmed at the end of season 2 that they were 5 hosts being taken out rather than just sort of like some data.
Clementine's a really interesting one too, because if she, like, for hypothesis here, let's say Dolores puts Clementine and Martin Connells, that would be a really interesting setup for Maeve interacting with Tommy Flanagan's Martin Connell's character. I think that would be interesting too. That's something that we should consider, Clementine.
Yeah, I mean, I tend not to think so, partly because she's not really being connected in with Dolores, and partly that her original character was not like that.
Yeah.
And then she effectively just got this kind of like ghost wipe that they put on her to be spreading the Maeve virus or whatever they called it. Go on, Hax.
I'm sorry. Random thought. Did we ever see Dolores separate the data from Peter Abernathy's brain? Because, like, assuming that he's back in the story at all, I think it also relies on the sense that she has that decryption key still. Because that would align to like what the.
So I think what we saw, and anyone who's watched this with an eye for detail recently can tell us, is that she took it out. She took it with her. She put it in when she went to the forge, and that was all we saw of it. So that seems to have, as far as we had been told at the time, that was the encryption key with this outer layer of sort of a bit of Peter Abernathy there, which was whatever got dropped on him to start with. This kind of fits, and so my take is that what she has done is that the encryption key is no longer there. She's just kept what bit of him was there, and then from her memories rebuilt the rest. And so one of the things that she says in this trailer is she says, remember who you are or were, or something like that, which is this is the kind of thing that you go, well, who would you actually say that to, Dolores? You wouldn't say that to Angela or whatever, because why would you need to? That's she knows who she is. This is trying to encourage her father to get back to being her father, not whatever it was that had been messed around with his mind before. Let's just quickly pick up Costume CEO. Thank you so much for you came out with a couple more comments on the costumes. For those who are watching this, I wish my technology were good enough for me to be able to bring these up on the screen and show you. But if you go and have a look on Hax Dogma's Twitter, all of us are on Twitter. If you want to search for us, that would be fantastic. But look on Hax Dogma's Twitter. There is the 2 pictures side by side, one of William in a white costume of some kind, one of Francis, Caleb's buddy, in an orange one of some kind. Costume CEO's other 2 comments were that it's possible that it's a prison stroke guard outfit, this being the Francis one, but the colours of the 2 outfits are definitely different. So they're not just the same outfit in different colours. So thank you so much for that, Heidi. That's really, really helpful. I think we had another super chat. Oh, yeah. Petrol Dollar, thank you so much, saying jumping the shark, a great way to start a question. Jumping the shark, reach a point at which far-fetched events are included merely for the sake of novelty, indicative of a decline in quality. Yeah, I don't think they've jumped the shark with this season, other than a cameo that I'm not even going to mention because I disliked it that much. In episode 2, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That for me did not work, but other than that, I think it's still working really well this season, I have to say. Let's pick up on, is there anything on that storyline before we start thinking about the episode title and the possibility of William appearing? Is there anything else you want to pick up on sort of the whole Dolores and Charlotte Hale side of things for this that we might expect in this episode coming up? Either of you?
I don't think so. So one of my viewers pointed out this connection between the mirror that Charlotte Hale is looking at in this promo. Looks exactly like the mirror that Emily had in her bedroom set when we see William's house before Juliet kills herself. And I don't really know if it's the same mirror. It's interesting that they're both silver mirrors, but I did just want to bring that up as a thought that I've been waiting on.
Okay, I think that's helpful, and I think that the mirror thing we will pick up on in just a moment, because the tagline to this, Kyle, I'm sure you remember the exact thing here, so I'll throw to you. But what they produce, HBO, the sort of the official bump, they produce the episode title, which we will talk about in just a second, and they also produce like a little tagline, a little teaser line for each episode. And Kyle, you told me before before we went on air what the tagline was for this episode.
If you don't like what you see in the mirror, don't blame the mirror.
Dun dun.
Dun dun dun. It's really interesting because Maeve is looking at a mirror in the trailer. We got William looking at mirrors. We have Charlotte Hale in mirrors. So there's all this mirroring going on.
And you think that this is a hint that we will get William back this episode?
Yeah. So I think me and Hax talked a little bit about this yesterday when we were discussing live, the possibility of William going through some sort of VR torture. I think he's going to have a really, really rough go of it whenever we see him, because his cornerstone moment, unfortunately, was him killing his daughter. And I think he's going to be feeling quite a bit of regret and guilt for that. William is definitely a tragic character. Of course, we saw him make strides throughout season 2. I keep on talking about the episode, The Riddle of the Sphinx, where he, decidedly changed his actions, and he's reflecting on the suicide of his wife, and he decides to have a deviation and not kill Lawrence's wife. But I just have this feeling that we're going to see this incredibly tragic journey for William throughout season 3.
Sure. So, and I think you're right. He's hit bottom. Whether we think he's in a prison or a mental hospital or whatever, it's clearly a dark place for him in this season. So, Hax, on the assumption he does come back, he will come back, but maybe it'll be this episode, maybe it'll be an episode or two's time. What do you think the jumping in point is with it? Are they going to take us right back to him lying on the sand there, or are they going to jump into him as being in whatever sort of institution we think he's in? Where do you think they'll start?
I think 100% they start in whatever institution he's at. I don't think they need to show us the in between, simply because they're reintroducing a character they already know, and we don't need them. We don't need to see them carry the stretcher, right? We know that he gets saved. We know that he's in this, assuming that he's not dead and this is the real him and it's not fidelity or simulation or anything like that. Yeah, I think they start directly in that, and or maybe show maybe a little bit more of how he comes to be in that, because a lot of the mental health stuff in season 1 and 2 that really shape William as this person that could need a mental hospital is very subtle and really only apparent when you look at it under a microscope. So I think that really if they want to do that, then they're going to have to sell that, and of course maybe show us exactly why they think currently that he should be there. So yeah, both of those I think we'll probably just jump into that plot right away, though.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with that, and we will be guessing through this what's going on with him, because the there are some shots we've had from the trailers of him what looks to be going back through his old life. The one of him shooting a mirror seems to have been in his old house. There seems to have been him in the bath, which looks like the one where his wife committed suicide in. And also we get Dolores coming to him dressed in the old Dolores Abernathy rancher's daughter kind of costume, all of which seems to be like his past coming back at him.
Yeah.
And I think I would agree that, yeah, the way they will probably show this is through him being in some kind of institution and in his mind going back over stuff. What intrigues me is where this ends up, because I don't think they'll just have this as a standalone thing that, oh, I wonder what's going on with him. We'll come back to him in season 4. There will be a tie-in to the wider plot, and I do wonder whether that's in with, as they've established it, it would appear, him still having some kind of interest in Delos, whether it's completely controlling interest or whether it's just a voting rights or something like that. He will have an ability to do something in Delos if he comes back in. So maybe that's the way back in.
You know what's so interesting, Robert, is the admission that he makes to his wife. That is so huge, right? Because there's actually discussion going on in chat whether his wife's suicide or killing his daughter is his cornerstone moment. That's something that we can definitely debate. Those are two really big moments. And I think that him being in that bath scene again, him reliving that is certainly interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the implication of the post-credit scene on season 2 was in terms of host William, his cornerstone, because that's just a thing for cornerstones, then that is killing his daughter that was his cornerstone, the moment that he kept on coming back to. Let's talk about the episode title. Kyle, I know you've got some thoughts on this one, and you sent me the it's called The Absence of Field, which is quite an esoteric one. But this seems to come from a poem which goes like this, called Keeping Things Whole, which goes like this. In a field, I am the absence of field. This is always the case. Wherever I am what is missing. When I walk, I part the air, and always the air moves in to fill the spaces where my body's been. We all have reasons for moving. I move to keep things whole. And that's the kind of poem that it takes quite a lot to sort of get your head around. But Carl, did you want to sort of kick us off first with what you think the absence of field might mean as an episode title?
Yeah, so I think the thread that's going to connect to all of the different POVs we see in this episode is to what the author of this poem is trying to say. There's two clear things that are happening in this poem. One is it deals with two separate things, the part and the whole, something that is clearly happening in Westworld all the time. And I think it's really interesting that it illustrates the parts that are essential to make the unifying nature of the whole. And it also talks about the nature has smaller parts which can be divided into separate elements. So my understanding of this poem is that the poet has lost himself in the field. And I think what we see happening in the trailer, and perhaps this might kind of lead to what me and Hax were talking about, that VR torture. William has lost himself in the field. Because if you look in the trailer, William is looking at one mirror, then he's in the shot, he's in the center, and then there's another mirror. So I think he is definitely trapped somewhere. That's just my guess.
Okay. Have you got any
stuck shooting the
poetry
mirror
interpretation idea?
Yeah, so my immediate interpretation reading this is like the invisible man, making his way through the world, not being seen. He's I part the air and always the air moves in. I fill the spaces. Like he exists, he's going through it, not being noticed, but has to keep moving to keep himself. I don't know how that applies.
Well,
What?
actually, I actually think
that's my interpretation.
I actually think it connects to the conversation William and his wife were having about his pilgrimages, why he was going to Westworld, and the direct actions that William took that fractured his family.
Yeah.
So
I really hope we get a backstory of William in the sense of like his childhood or something like that, because we know it's very similar to Ford, because Ford says that, and we know Ford came from nothing with an abusive father. Like, I want to know his backstory, and I think that maybe this could, allude to what William was, before he became a member of Delos and before he, got in with the wife and built himself to be this titan of industry. I think it could apply there, and I'm really interested to see more of his backstory.
And I happen to think that Ford, when he gives him that card, he's calculated William's loop. Right? He talks about how humans have easier loops to calculate than hosts. He's calculated this loop. He must have researched that William's wife went to rehab and that William had all these problems. He knows that William is going back to Westworld to play these games to figure out this maze. So I think that him giving that card and him calculating that Emily might see that and discover that her getting to Westworld was definitely calculated by Ford. 100%.
Yeah. Well, Ford knew William, I don't know, better than almost anyone because of the data that he had about him. And this wasn't my original thought. Again, I can't remember who came up with it, but I thought it was a fascinating observation. When you get back in which episode it was in season 2, when Ford goes out into the real world and meets William at that sort of gala thing, and he sends it, shoots across to him the card with all of his information about what he's been doing in the park. He meets him at the bar, which sounds just like, well, okay, fair enough. Yeah. But Emily says to him, "You don't drink. You only drink in the park. You don't drink in the real world." And it's like, well, how on earth did Ford know to meet him there? Because everyone else would think in the real world that's not where he is. I thought it was a fascinating little observation. But I want to give you my poetry interpretation. So we're not doing Bible study, but we are going to do poetry interpretation.
We should do this every week.
Absolutely. So in a field, I am the absence of field. This is always the case. Wherever I am what is missing. Now, that I think is the key thing, which is that it's basically where you are is not the thing that otherwise would be there. If you're in a field, the bit where you are is not field, it's you. And that, I think, is fascinating on at least 2 levels in terms of what we're thinking about here. Because if we've got somebody pretending to be Charlotte Hale to someone who knows her well, like, say, Charlotte's child, then actually what is the host pretending to be Charlotte Hale might look like Charlotte Hale, but they are the absence of Charlotte Hale. That is what they are, because where Charlotte Hale should be, she isn't. It's someone else. So that's like the first layer to this. And I would say the second layer to this, with this kind of the idea of where you are, that means that something else is not. If you think of yourself for one moment as like a supercomputer hunting for someone like Dolores in the world, you don't know where Dolores is because she's not in your system. She's not a human. She's not got all of the implant and all the rest of it. How do you search for her? Maybe the way you search for her is by looking where there is a gap, where there should be something else, where there is the absence of a thing, and that is where she is. So I think that there might be a couple of different layers to what's going on.
Wow. Well, Robert, if I can jump in there, I talked about that actually, I believe, connects to Caleb, because Dolores is looking at the system and looking at everyone as, like, the big 1%. We saw her do a beeline for the person, I can't remember his last name, the Delos executive that she killed in episode 1. But Caleb, what if she discovers that Caleb is not part of that whole? Because we have 2 things happening in the poem as well, the whole and the part. So I think that Dolores could have that self-discovery about Caleb. This is just a thought.
She could, absolutely. Yeah. And Kiddo B in the chat is pointing out field could refer to negative and positive space as well. So if you're going absolutely meta when you're trying to think about field, you can have magnetic fields and all the rest of it. Dolores will be taking up space that otherwise would be other things. Okay, we've got 5-10 more minutes before we're going to wrap up, guys. So now is the time to drop any further questions you've got, final questions into the chat. We'll try and pick up on them. But before we do, is there anything else that we've not mentioned? Just thinking, I think, specifically forward to this week's episode. Kyle, let's go to you first on this one. Is there anything that you particularly like to talk about, or maybe something somebody said in the chat that you think we should pick up on?
No, I think we're going to have some really interesting scenes. It'll be really interesting to see how many POVs we have in this episode, because they kind of cut up episode 1 and 2. They kind of split people apart. So it'll be interesting to see who isn't in the episode, the absence of who is not going to be there. So I think, like I said, I'm most interested to see William, but I don't really have I don't have the trailer in front of me. I think we pretty much covered everything. So
the I do want to mention something I saw in chat, and one point in the trailer, we do see Charlotte Hill smoking, and
yes,
the only characters that we've seen smoke before are herself, Teresa, and Emily. And I remember when season 2 was live, and everyone caught this connection between Emily and Teresa. Like, everyone was like, okay, it's clear that Emily is a copy of Teresa because they both smoke. It's interesting that it's included. It may be pointing to it being Emily. Equally, if it was Teresa, I would love to see her as a character back in it. But we also see her talking to her child, and I'm probably most excited for that, because I think that's where this whole thing collapses. And because, of course, the child would know, assumingly would know, that his mother is not his mother. So I hope that we see a little bit of that, or maybe just the ramp up to, the child questioning, like, why doesn't she cut my PB&Js the same way she did before, kind of thing. Just like little breadcrumbs until they figure it out. And then, and then this host has to decide whether or not to, kill this child to keep a secret, or to, what they do after they're accused of not being the real mother. So I'm excited for that.
You speak about mothers and fathers. One thing that is interesting is there is a rumor that William's mother is cast in this season. And there is this interesting father-mother influence that's happening with all of these characters, how they, especially with William too. So I think that's really interesting. Perhaps we might actually see William's mother in some sort of VR torture thing.
Do you know who was cast?
No, I'm going to have to, I have it somewhere. It was on Reddit, and I'll grab it for you.
Excited. That sounds good. Yeah.
Excellent. And I think a few people are picking up on the smoking thing as well. I think we did see Peter Abernathy. It might have been the other version of Peter Abernathy smoking with a pipe. And also, I think, interestingly, if you see how he naturally sat on that chair back in the ranch, if you cast your mind all the way back to the beginning of season 1, it was sort of leaning back, hands in front of him like that, which was very reminiscent of the way that Tessa Thompson's as Charlotte Hale was sitting at that board meeting, kind of leaning back like that. So I do, again, it's a small detail, but it's the kind of thing that you got. Actors tend to try and pick up on those kind of details, but if they're trying to mimic a character, that seemed very much a kind of like a him kind of thing.
Yeah.
Let's just have a quick flick through to see if there's any more questions in the chat. Let's say, so somebody's asked about Lee Sizemore. Do you think we're going to see any more of Lee Sizemore? Do you think he's now forever just lost because he was just in that simulation? Kyle, what do you reckon? Any more Lee Sizemore?
Yeah, I don't. It's possible. Maybe. I actually don't think so. I actually think what they did specifically with Warworld, them having it just specifically tied to one episode, was really smart, because we only have 8 episodes this season. So I don't know if we're going to see him again. We could see some other characters, but Yeah, I think it was a one-time thing for me.
Fair enough. And Hax, have you got any more gems of knowledge to sort of drop on us before we round up for the day?
Nothing comes to mind. Lee Sizemore, would love to see him again. One of my favorite characters. Crucial for telling the story of a host future that does not paint all humanity as bad, right? Very much did something critical that in the history of this revolution it should be remembered, and that's show a genuine sacrifice of a human life for a host life. And yeah, I think I would love to see him back, but I think just as it is, that as a point is really impactful.
It is, and it underlines the fact that she saw a human doing a purely self-sacrificial act on her behalf, which I think is very important. It was there in season 2, but this just sort of underlines the fact that she knows that. So she's not just going to be assuming that all humans are bad. She is now going to have a lot more of a kind of a nuanced take. Okay, guys, let's just start to round it up there. Kyle, do you want to remind people where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, Azor Ahype on all social media, Azor Hype. Like I said, I'm going to be doing some Westworld videos. I'm pretty regular on Twitter, although I'm trying to avoid it. I get into political spats. We won't get into that. But really, I think Westworld is only going to get better as the season goes on. Super excited to chat about The Witcher and the Westworld on the channel.
Excellent. And Hax, how about you? Where can people find you on the internet?
Yep. You can find me at Hax Dogma on YouTube, Twitter, or Patreon. Weekly videos. Our Discord is also just revamped. We have a whole new layout. You can come and talk with us, hang out, play games, whatever you want. And you can find the link to the Discord in any of the descriptions of my videos. So yeah, be sure to check that out.
Excellent. Guys, you know that I only have people on this channel I would personally recommend you go and check out their stuff, so please do go and have a look. The links to their channels are down. Hang on, guys, I'll make you disappear for 1 second. The links to their channels are down in the description there if you want to check them out. If you are watching this a little bit later, not live, then somewhere here-ish is going to appear a link to my Patreon page if you're interested in either supporting the channel or getting access to some of the stuff I do for my patrons. And appearing somewhere here-ish will be a link to my Westworld Season 3 playlist if you want some of my episode breakdowns or something like that. But thank you so much, guys. Enjoy the episode. Look forward to all of the episode breakdowns. Be back here, same time next week. Take care, everyone. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.